It was a week of brutal politics.
If we'd have said no bastards for the Prime Minister's role, then frankly we'd have been leaderless for generations.
I'm going to vote the division.
I shall be supporting Kevin Rudd tonight.
I felt for Julia.
The case for a return to Kevin Rudd was powerful.
We are on course for a catastrophic defeat. I believe that what the nation...
But will it save Labor?
Essentially, the madness had to end.
Are you convinced Kevin Rudd has changed his management style?
Oh, absolutely.
The final throes of a very uncivil war. Welcome to Four Corners. Australia's oldest political party has a long and colourful history, but not even Shakespeare could have written this chapter. Winning and keeping power has rarely come easily for Labor, and when its leaders win government, they're usually accorded hero status. But in just 3 years, Labor has cut down 2 Prime Ministers, one of them Australia's first female to take the job, and in the process experienced one of the lowest ebbs in its century-long existence. Kevin Rudd is now back for his second go, with little time to re-establish his authority before the election is on him. But at least he can take some comfort from the early polls. On the other hand, has there ever been such a dramatic drain of talent and experience from a government front bench, with the resignation or retirement of a generation of senior Labor politicians? As well, the 2 independents who sustained Julia Gillard in office, Rob Oakeshott and Tony Windsor, are retiring at this election, virtually handing their seats to the opposition. Kevin Rudd now faces an election sometime between now and November, knowing he can't afford to lose a single seat and has to actually gain 2 just to maintain the status quo. To do that, he'll have to reunite a bitterly divided party behind him and survive a predictably tough coalition attack, which is using ammunition mostly supplied by Rudd's own colleagues. After a month observing the cauldron, Marion Wilkinson reports on a truly remarkable time in Australian politics.
Good evening and welcome to the 2013 Federal Parliamentary Press Gallery Midwinter Ball. Please take your seats.
The last days of the 43rd Parliament are perhaps best described as surreal. None more so than the night of the annual Midwinter Ball, hosted by the Parliamentary Press Gallery. As the central players took their places, Labor's bitter leadership feud permeated the room.
Hi guys, how are you?
For the vanquished Kevin Rudd, restoration was within reach. For Julia Gillard, defeat was at hand.
Nice job on the hair.
This is a Carlsbad pattern. Thank you.
Hey buddy, hi.
Please take your seats. The evening is about to begin.
Little wonder, behind closed doors, Gillard began her comic address to the gallery with a quip about the bloodiest revenge scene on television this year.
I'm very pleased to be here tonight, and can I say I haven't seen such a festive scene since the Red Wedding episode of Game of Thrones, which is slightly worrisome because it was pretty hard to get the chainmail on under this costume.
But the laughter died in the building exactly 1 week later, when Gillard's key colleagues cut her down. It was a stunning climax to the leadership battle that brought the Labor Party to the brink of its greatest defeat in decades.
I can announce the result. It is Kevin Rudd, 57 votes, Julia Gillard, 45 votes.
As you would probably be aware by now, Kevin Rudd has been elected as leader of the Federal Parliamentary Labor Party. I congratulate Mr Rudd on his election.
In 2007, the Australian people elected me to be their Prime Minister. That is a task that I resume today with humility, with honour and with an important sense of energy and purpose.
Your Excellency, I present the Honourable Kevin Rudd MP.
In the last tumultuous weeks of Julia Gillard's minority government, senior party figures finally agreed to bury 3 years of bitter division over Rudd rather than accept political annihilation at the election.
If we'd have said no bastards for the Prime Minister's role, then frankly, we'd have been leaderless for generations. We've had some of the biggest bastards of all time have been Prime Minister of this country. The issue is not whether they're a bastard or not. The issue is what sort of job are they going to do for Australians. Now, I unequivocally, have supported Julia, and I think she's a wonderful person, and I don't in any way think this is a great position to be in. But we have to put the Labor Party first. We have to put the Australian people first. And I know that Julia will not do to Kevin what Kevin did to Julia.
I felt for Julia and her supporters, her close supporters, and I also felt for a narrative which had reached its conclusion with this particular action. But it is politics, extremely without comfort, and you must continue to persevere. You must go on.
What we have to do is to put the party ahead of the individual, because by doing that, you put the country first. It's what I've always believed. It will remain true for all the time I'm here and for the time I'm not here.
If Labor still has a stronghold, it's Simon Crean's home state, Victoria. But in May, party officials wrote off 3 seats in this state, a stark admission that under Gillard, Labor had already lost the election.
Meeting, performing, artistic, creative. It's going to be a significant swing against us. What we've got to try and do, I think, is focus on what we have done. It's good.
For Crean, a Labor stalwart, keeping hope alive in the weeks leading up to the leadership change was tough going.
Thank you for making it out here. It's very exciting for our students.
Oh, well, that's good. And how'd the show go? Jesus Christ,
fantastic.
Super. Did it?
Really well.
A former Labor leader and seasoned pro, he'd held on to his own seat in outer Melbourne by never forgetting all politics are local.
We've just introduced a new program that is Creative Young Australians. We're calling for applications. They're significant grants for groups. And the other thing that you should keep
at the local high school, he applauded the students as they rehearsed for a big musical competition.
See if that works for you.
Crean doggedly pushed the government's achievement at every turn. But for almost a year, the polls were saying voters had just switched off.
Creativity.
The unresolved Labor leadership had hung in the air since March. On March 21 this year, Crean dramatically went public, calling for Rudd to challenge Gillard for the leadership.
He has got no option but to run. I don't want any more games. I'm sick to death of it. It's about time. He stood up and instead of having his camp leak things, actually had the courage of his conviction and his belief. I'm urging Mr. Rudd to put his name forward in the interests of breaking the deadlock.
But Rudd, lacking the numbers, refused to stand.
Well, essentially the madness had to end. We weren't able to get a message up because there was a lot of internals, a lot of white noise that was preventing that message getting up. So in many ways it was a decision not taken individually. I had taken a lot of soundings. I had been urged to play a role. And I had played that role. And I played it in the best interests of the party. And I showed the courage that was necessary. Unfortunately, there wasn't sufficient collective courgillard. Now listen, I'm going to have to go. I'm very happy to see... I'm going to be in...
Gillard sacked Crean from Cabinet.
Thank you. I understood the consequences of this. This was a very hard decision for me because I had been a mentor to her, a friend to her. I had tried to get her to understand the nature of our problems weren't just the leadership destabilisation, although that played an important role. And I came to a judgment in the end in the best interests of the party, as hard as it was, that was the right call. I still think it was the right call. What I lament is the fact that the party didn't show sufficient collective courage to join with me.
7 Rudd supporters fell on their sword after the aborted March challenge, throwing the government into crisis. They included 3 experienced ministers: Human Services Minister Kim Carr, Resources Minister Martin Ferguson and Tertiary Education Minister Chris Bowen.
The best thing for the Labor Party and for Australia would be for Kevin Rudd to return to the Prime Ministership.
Now, people say your seat, this seat, is safe Labor. Just before Crean returned for the last 2 weeks of Parliament, he was not fully convinced Rudd would challenge again. Do you think that Julia Gillard will lead you to the election?
She's the leader. There's no challenger. The issue was resolved, 11 weeks ago? People were given the chance to go for an alternative, didn't take it. The candidate didn't stand. End of that story.
Please make welcome the Honourable Kevin Rudd.
Have you ever thought of giving up when life gets too tough?
Have I?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, sometimes it just feels as if everything gets stacked against you on a particular day. Often that is happening in your head. Stand up, you dust yourself off, and you get on with it.
3 days before Parliament returned, Rudd was campaigning in southwest Sydney. His closest supporters, including Fairfield MP Chris Bowen, were planning a last tilt at the Labor leadership. Rudd had repeatedly promised he would not challenge Gillard, but he was now playing his trump card, his widespread popularity with voters. He wanted to force his colleagues to confront the choice ahead of them when they returned to Parliament the coming week.
If Julia takes us to the next election on the 14th of September, it's a landslide. And I think maybe Labor going to be lucky to have 40 seats in the Parliament. So the only chance is Mr. Rudd back. And we need the finest man to bring him back. You create a mess, now your turn to bring him back.
By now, Rudd was swaying influential Gillard supporters in the broader party, like former Queensland Premier Peter Beattie.
The position in the polls is terrible. Most of that has been self-inflicted. The leadership battle that's gone on, the leaking, the undermining, the backstabbing. A divided House cannot rule. It's very simple, and that's the consequences of that bitter division, this fight over the leadership that has brought us to a bottoming out of the polls. Now, we can change that provided we can get some consensus about the leadership.
Bill Shorten, once one of Gillard's most loyal ministers, was vital to Rudd's bid.
I'm married, haven't seen you in a little while. I understand you've moved on, haven't you?
We're just going to sit and grab one comment with you after the event.
Possibly.
Yeah, you can just say what you want to say.
Might be nothing. Please.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. It's great to be here because we get a chance to talk about the future of our nation. I would submit to you today there are few arguments stronger than the case for Labor, than the case for superannuation. It's too important to leave to Tony Abbott. And when you look at
a former head of the Australian Workers' Union, Shorten was publicly refusing to desert Gillard. But he was admitting the polls pointed to a wipeout at the election.
Thank you very much.
You were very bleak in your radio interview earlier, a few days ago, about a possible landslide defeat. How are you feeling today? Do you still think that you're facing...
The job is ahead of Labor, but I know we've got the better arguments, and part of our challenge is to make sure that those arguments are getting out to people. I've said before, I support the Prime Minister, and I certainly believe that we have better personnel and we have better arguments, but we certainly need to make the case.
Bill Shorten doesn't want to go down in history as the man who knifed two Prime Ministers.
Shorten was in an exquisitely sensitive position. 3 years ago, along with key party power brokers, he played a central role in bringing down Kevin Rudd's Prime Ministership and installing Julia Gillard in his place.
Bill Shorten was central to this group of men who walked into Canberra and they decided they wanted to remove a democratically elected leader in his first term of government. And that has proven to be a disastrous miscalculation.
But back in 2010, senior Labor ministers were deeply divided about the decision to bring down Rudd. The night of the coup, Simon Crean now reveals he raised his concerns directly with Gillard. You had gone to Julia Gillard and had personally told her that you did not think this was a good idea. Is that a correct account or not?
Yes, I didn't think it was a good idea. I did not. But at that stage, not only had the issue advanced, the lady was not for turning.
A midnight knock on the door, followed by political execution, is no way that the Australian Prime Minister should be treated.
At the time, Anthony Albanese also warned MPs bringing down Rudd risked a backlash from voters.
I think the way that the Prime Ministership changed in 2010 was not understood by people. They woke up in the morning and there was a new Prime Minister. I argued at that time that the problem with the decision that was being made was that we ran the risk of ending two Labor Prime Ministerships in the one night.
Hello. Hi. Hi, Julia. Nice to meet you, Sarah.
Hello, Sarah. Hi, Judy Rogers.
Behind the smiles of the 2010 election campaign, Gillard was haunted by Rudd's removal.
There's lots of little...
The result left her leading a precarious minority government. Gillard would be plagued by Labor infighting for 3 years until it finally climaxed in the last 2 weeks of Parliament.
Mr. Swan, what are you expecting this week?
I've already done a pretty extensive press conference today, thanks.
The Labor Party's become a soap opera, so we're just watching from the sidelines.
Looking forward to the last sitting?
It's going to be a very interesting 2 weeks, I think.
You think so?
I think so.
When politicians returned to Canberra for the end of the Parliament, the Labor leadership crisis was inescapable.
Is the leadership being settled within the Labor Party?
Ministers with critical reforms still in the balance were being sucked into leadership speculation.
Always.
Thank you very much. I thought the member for Flinders might be tabling a copy of his thesis in favour of...
But Gillard could not be rolled in the first week back. Her signature reforms to school education funding, known as the Gonski reforms, needed to pass through the Senate, as Greens leader Christine Milne explained at the time.
I think a lot of the factional deals that are always done in the Labor Party will have in mind the need to secure a number of pieces of legislation before a move could be made. And so I think the probability is that the Prime Minister will be there until those key pieces of legislation go through.
Julia Gillard's supporters argue only she could have succeeded in pushing Labor's ambitious program through a minority government. In the last days, Labor finally got the school education funding bill through the Parliament, even though key premiers were still to sign up.
It is one of the hallmark reforms of this government. It's one that must be concluded satisfactorily, and it will be so important for state premiers and treasurers to really seriously put the interests of the students in their state first, and for us to get this thing done once and for all. And the proudest moment for me as a minister was to see the passage of that Australian Education Bill in the Parliament. Now, there's more to happen, but it's law, and as law, it provides the greatest surety for young Australians now and in the future that they'll get the education that they deserve.
I think they will look back and say, well, they actually did a few things, these people. You know, the Murray-Darling thing was fixed, the broadband network came out, Gonski, regional school kids, quite incredible. And the most important, in my view, and I congratulate Julia Gillard and Greg Combay particularly, is that this Parliament has actually tried to do something about climate change. And whether we like it or not, and it's not short-term and it's not fluffy, but we've got to do something about it, and these people have had a go. And I think that'll be rewarded in history.
But the present chorus of critics around Gillard was impossible to ignore.
I think the government has had moments of great triumph. Disability care, putting a price on carbon, remarkable achievements, but punctuated by periods of great instability and missteps at key moments.
In the dying days of her leadership, Gillard's old ally, Peter Beattie, told us she should go.
The truth is, she's managed a minority government that I don't believe anyone else could have managed. At a time when Australians voted for that, her job was to make it work. I think she's done extraordinary things under the circumstances. Yes, they've made mistakes. Yes, there's been some bad political judgments, but she's basically been undermined. That's what's happened, and that's why the polls are as bad as they are.
Can it only be resolved now with a change in the leadership?
Look, I think sadly we've got to the case where that is the position.
The truth is that we were tracking in terms of polling around about 30%, give or take a point or two, for a considerable period of time. Now, people know that that results in a significant loss of seats, potentially also results in a loss not just of the House of Representatives, but there's a potential for a very right-wing Conservative leader as Prime Minister with a right-wing Senate.
Julia Gillard left Canberra on the morning of June 25 for what would be one of her last official duties. Both Gillard and Rudd joined old friends and adversaries to honour the life of Australia's former First Lady, Hazel Hawke. But Labor's unison was brief. The momentum to remove Gillard was escalating. Labor's day of reckoning began, oddly, with a touch footy match on the Senate Oval. Anthony Albanese, the government's numbers man, was playing for the Blues in a mock state of origin for the NRL. Albanese was on the winning side.
Thank you very much.
But this was the end of the fun and games.
Mate, you look better with a beanie on, I reckon.
Yeah, he needs a beanie. They're bad losers, those Queenslanders. Or is it New England?
Inside Parliament House, Rudd's colleagues were circulating a petition calling for a spill of the leadership. It was expected the next day.
I think if I thought I was going to be part of a caucus ballot for leader and then a candidate for Deputy Prime Minister, I probably wouldn't have been on the football field in the early hours of that very cold Canberra morning.
So the timing was a surprise to you?
It was certainly the case. I was not expecting there to be a ballot that day.
Looks as though I'm sitting.
As it turned out, it was a day full of surprises.
The announcement I'd like to make this morning is, and I won't take 17 minutes, is essentially that I won't be contesting the next election. I've sat and watched...
Tony Windsor, independent MP for New England, who supported Gillard's minority government at big political and personal cost, called it quits.
If I could thank my wife, I won't look at her. We were in kindergarten together. I thank you for all of your work, particularly some of the vitriol that you were confronted with us as well. To my children, geez, I didn't think I'd get into this bullshit, Oakeshott. They've grown up.
Rob Oakeshott, independent member for Line, who had also stuck with Gillard in the face of enormous pressure, was bowing out with his mate.
A bit of a third-party comment, and we'll talk more later. He was there at the right time when this all, not of our choosing, happened around us, and none of us had a manual and we had to work it out. And you've all seen it, and you all know it. This is the best in the business right here. And, you know, good luck in time in the paddock.
The resignation of two men so vital to Gillard's minority government was a portent of what was to come in the next critical hours. News of the caucus petition to spill the Labor leadership was everywhere in Parliament House. Rudd's forces believed they had at least 24 hours before a ballot on the last sitting day of Parliament. But Gillard decided to surprise them. At 4:15 in the afternoon, she went live on Sky TV.
I haven't seen this petition. Call me old-fashioned, but the way in which these things are normally done is a challenger approaches the leader of the Labor Party and asks them to call a ballot for the leadership. You shake hands and then a ballot is held. So, whilst I haven't been approached by anyone saying that they wish to be Prime Minister or Labor leader, it is my intention to call a ballot for the Labor leadership at 7 p.m. tonight. This is it. There are no more opportunities. Tonight is the night, and this is it.
In less than an hour, Rudd stood before a hastily called press conference in Labor's caucus room.
My fellow Australians, my fellow members of the Australian Parliamentary Labor Party. Today I'm announcing that I will be a candidate for the position of Leader of the Parliamentary Labor Party. And the truth is, if we're all being perfectly honest about it right now, is that we're on course for a catastrophic defeat, unless there is change. And so today I'm saying to you, the people of Australia, I'm seeking to respond to your call that I've heard from so many of you to do what I can to prevent Mr Abbott from becoming Prime Minister. I have an hour and 40 minutes to speak to a number of friends in the Parliamentary Labor Party about what will happen here in this room at 7 p.m, so I've got a zip. Thank you.
Can you win, Mr Rudd? Can you win?
For Rudd, his second attempt to take back the Prime Ministership now hung in the balance. Just 20 minutes before the caucus vote, Cabinet Minister Bill Shorten, the man who helped bring Rudd down 3 years earlier, went before the cameras.
I have carefully considered my position. I have now come to the view that Labor stands the best chance to defend the legacies of this term of government and to continue improving the lives of millions of Australians if Kevin Rudd is our leader. I understand that this position that I have adopted may come at a personal cost to myself. It has weighed heavily on my mind in recent weeks. If Prime Minister Gillard...
Shorten's signal to wavering Labor MPs was clear. Gillard was doomed.
Thank you very much.
What's the Prime Minister's reaction, Mr Shorten?
But she would go down biting.
Prime Minister, do you have the numbers? The remaining Prime Minister's fight. Does it have to be inside?
We have just conducted the ballot. There was a spill for the position of leadership. I can announce the result. It is Kevin Rudd, 57 votes, Julia Gillard, 45 votes.
For Peter Garrett, a Gillard supporter, the end of Labor's 3-year leadership struggle came at a high cost to the party and the government.
I felt that the vote reflected a view that I didn't have, and, you know, ultimately I understand as a member of the caucus that the vote is respected and the decision's made, and in this case the leadership changed. But I think that one of the most corrosive things that I've witnessed in public life, and including in the Parliament and including in the caucus, is when people are seeking to advance a position or, for example, to advance a different proposition that the caucus might consider about leadership, that in doing that we see a great deal of activity and behaviour which ultimately is lessening both the integrity of the institutions that we're serving and also reflecting out to the public something which isn't why I came into politics. It's not what I came here to do.
But for Anthony Albanese, going with Rudd meant a fighting chance at the federal election.
The ballot was Anthony Albanese, 61, Simon Crean, 38, and 3 informal votes.
It also helped secure Albanese the Deputy Prime Minister's job against the Labor stalwart Simon Crean. Remarkably, Albanese secured votes from both the Rudd and Gillard forces.
Mr Albanese, what's your reaction?
Gillard's deputy, Wayne Swan, had agreed days earlier that if Gillard lost the leadership, he would back Albanese as deputy.
I was raised with 3 great faiths, the Labor Party, the Catholic Church and South, and the Labor Party, for them to elect me as Deputy Leader was a great honour. And I also felt, because of my great friendship with Wayne Swan, we'd had a discussion over the previous days. I'd made it clear that if he was a candidate, I would not be a candidate. I would be supportive of him. And he made it very clear that, he wouldn't be a candidate if there was a change of leadership, but secondly, that he would support my candidacy.
With the battle over, Julia Gillard accepted defeat with grace and closed ranks behind the party.
Election. I understand that at the caucus meeting today, the pressure finally got too great for many of my colleagues. I respect that, and I respect the decision that they have made. But I do say to my caucus colleagues, don't lack the guts, don't lack the fortitude, don't lack the resilience to go out there with our Labor agenda and to win this election. I know that it can be done. 3 years ago, I had the very great honour...
But she would not ignore that this night had brought down Australia's first female Prime Minister, or that during her 3 years in office, her gender had unleashed some savage personal attacks.
Humbling. It doesn't explain everything, it doesn't explain nothing, it explains some things. And it is for the nation to think in a sophisticated way about those shades of grey. What I am absolutely confident of is it will be easier for the next woman and the woman after that and the woman after that, and I'm proud of that.
Having secured victory, Kevin Rudd didn't blink as he stepped up at his press conference to promise an end to the politics of negativity.
In recent years, politics has failed the Australian people. There's just been too much negativity all round. There's been an erosion of trust. Negative, destructive personal politics has done much to bring dishonour to our Parliament, but done nothing to address the urgent challenges facing our nation, our communities, our families. In fact, it's been holding our country back. And all this must stop. And with all my heart, that is the purpose I intend to pursue through the office of Prime Minister. We can do better than that.
He also promised his colleagues the chaotic management that marred his last term in office would not be repeated. Are you convinced Kevin Rudd has changed his management style?
Oh, absolutely, and you've seen that on evidence. In spite of the frantic headlines in the newspapers about alleged policy shifts, that what we've done is have a considered approach. The one decision we've made in the first few days of the government was to extend the deadline for signing up to the Better Schools Plan. We renamed it the Better Schools Plan as well in terms of messaging what is, at the end of the day, about kids' future, both this generation and generations to come.
As you're probably all aware by now, I've announced it is my intention not to contest the seat of Hotham at the next election. This wasn't...
While Simon Crean voted for Rudd, he joined the parade of Labor's big names quitting Parliament after he failed to secure the deputy's job.
Trading off. This was a decision that I conveyed to the Prime Minister on Thursday when he asked me to come back into the Cabinet. I said to him that it was my intention not to recontest the seat, and he should be aware of it, so that he would have two options. Thanks very much, everyone. I look forward to seeing you in easier times from time to time in the future. Thank you.
Peter Garrett was one of several Gillard ministers who would not serve under Rudd.
I guess some things never change. Here I am in front of a microphone.
He spent his last day as Education Minister thanking the public servants who worked on the hallmark education reforms.
We've achieved a great deal in our period of time in office, and it will be judged kindly in history, and there's still more to be done.
His last night was spent downing a few drinks with staff and friends after announcing he too would not be standing at the election.
Done through the national partnerships. Look, we did have a few nice reds and chat about what has been an absolutely incredible and ultimately rewarding journey, and one which I have no regrets about. I carry no rancour from what I've done here in the Parliament and the experiences I've had. And I've met people of great capacity, and I'll take some friendships out of here. Not a lot, but I'll take some. But more than that, I'll just take out a sense that I really did give it the best that I did for those issues that we as a government believed needed to become part of the Australian way of life.
The ever-patient member for Lyne and his very cute and very patient family in the gallery now have the call.
Thank you, Speaker, and I've enjoyed...
Julia Gillard spent her last day on the backbench, stoic, until Independent MP Rob Oakeshott delivered an emotional salute to her Prime Ministership in his valedictory speech.
Start of this, we've done it. And so for that, I do dip my lid and say, well done, Prime Minister. I also hope you got my text, and I hope you don't mind me mentioning it. About 10 minutes before a party room ballot last night, you know, we all get a bit of a sense of what's going on in the joint. I sent the Prime Minister a text, and it was to say her father would be proud of her.
Kevin Rudd must now prove to his party he can succeed where Julia Gillard failed. He must get the measure of the man who ultimately did more than anyone to bring down not only Gillard, but Rudd himself 3 years ago.
The Leader of the Opposition is seeking the call on indulgence. The Leader of the Opposition is seeking the call.
Yes, I am, Madam Speaker. First of all, I congratulate the Prime Minister for returning to the high office which he formerly occupied and which he has been dreaming of returning to for 3 long years and 3 long days.
Unless Kevin Rudd can turn the tables on Labor's real opponent, his second Prime Ministership will be little more than a footnote in history.
Kevin Rudd certainly has no intention of becoming a footnote in history. That's in his hands for now. But the decision ultimately won't be his. It'll be yours. The only issue now is when. Next week on Four Corners, a real-life crime scene investigation, tracking the Boston bombers. Until then, good night.